Their connection transcended a mere working relationship. They represented each other's final opportunity for recuperation. Officer Mark Trener had confronted conflict, bereavement, and profound quietude. Yet it was a German shepherd named Rex who guided him back to a sense of normalcy. For an extended period, they traversed the streets of Ridgefield in unison, united by a bond of trust more profound than any familial tie. However, one fateful evening, a vicious assault shattered this connection. Rex disappeared, leaving only traces of blood on the ground and an unsettling stillness. Mark's subsequent actions were not dictated by procedure, they were deeply personal. This is an account of retribution, affection, and the indomitable link between a man and his canine companion. The desert sun had just started its descent behind the arid hills of Ridgefield, Arizona, as Officer Mark Trener navigated his patrol vehicle along the twisting thoroughfare. His grip on the steering wheel was steady, yet his thoughts were far removed, ensnared in the quiet that had accompanied him since returning from combat. Beside him, with ears erect and gaze sharp, sat Rex, a German shepherd whose focused stare seemed capable of perceiving one's very heartbeat. They communicated little, it was unnecessary. Years of shared missions, enduring scars, and silent journeys had forged a unique understanding based on glances, growls, and pure instinct. The community recognized them as a formidable duo, the battle-tested officer and the dog that never wavered. They had rescued individuals from disaster sites, detected hazards before they materialized, and on one occasion even pulled a drowning person from a waterway during a sudden deluge. Yet, Mark never regarded Rex as merely a functional asset. Rex was his purpose, his stability, his renewed chance at life after a period that had nearly stripped him of everything. That particular evening, the dispatch radio crackled, reporting disruptive motorcycle activity on a desolate stretch of road just beyond the town's limits. This was not unusual. Ridgefield had recently become a haven for lawless elements, a growing unrest that intensified with each passing week. Mark glanced at Rex, who was already vigilant, his ears slightly drawn back. An unspoken tension filled the air, not a visible one, but a palpable sensation that tightened around one's chest like a frigid cord. The patrol car moved past a service station on the outskirts of town, dimly illuminated by erratic neon lights. It was then that Rex emitted a low, guttural sound. Mark hadn't heard that particular tone in months, only when something was gravely amiss. He reduced the vehicle's speed. Just beyond the station, in an isolated area, stood an abandoned pickup truck, its doors ajar. The engine still emitted a faint clicking sound from residual heat. Tire impressions were deeply etched into the sand, swerving towards the dense undergrowth. Rex's nostrils twitched intensely. Without command, he jumped from the vehicle and began to follow the trail. Mark trailed behind, his hand poised near his sidearm. Each step into the dense vegetation seemed to make the night feel more oppressive, as if an unseen presence observed their every breath. The wind whistled through the cacti. Coyotes could be heard yelping in the distance, but Rex remained undistracted, moving with the precision of a soldier. Then, abruptly, silence descended. A sharp sound from behind him, followed by blackness. Mark's eyelids fluttered open, seconds or perhaps minutes later. His head throbbed, his vision was indistinct. The surroundings swirled in disarray. His fingers clutched the sand. His voice quivered as he called out, "Rex?" No response, only the wind. Then he observed it. Blood smeared across the gravel, forming a trail. A chill permeated his being. Nearby, a motorcycle helmet lay fractured on the earth. Upon its polished black exterior, a single, crimson paw mark was visible. He stumbled forward, fell to his knees, and retrieved it with trembling hands. Every muscle in his face strained against collapse. "They've taken him," his voice broke in the darkness. "They've injured my dog." And in that instant, something within Mark transformed, not the part shaped by his law enforcement training, but the part tempered by war, the part that had once pledged never to suffer another loss. What lurks in the desert's penumbra is not merely peril, it is a final accounting. Mark stood isolated in the moonlight, grasping the helmet as if it contained the very essence of his being. The traces of the motorcyclist's path were already vanishing into the windswept sand. Time was elapsing. With each passing minute, Rex was farther away, injured, terrified, surrounded by individuals who were unaware of what they had seized. Or perhaps they were aware, which made the situation even more grave. He did not report it via radio. He did not await reinforcements. His intuition indicated this was not a standard case, it was a deliberate communication. And if Rex was central to that communication, Mark intended to respond directly, without postponement, without adhering to protocols. He threw the helmet onto the passenger seat, where Rex usually sat, and sped off into the night, pursuing tire tracks that wound towards the periphery like a venomous serpent. The path was relentless, miles of unpaved road and eerie quiet. But Mark was not proceeding by guesswork, he was interpreting the desert as if it were an open book. Every snapped twig, every dislodged shrub, every speck of blood on a cactus spine, it all conveyed a message. Rex had been forcibly taken. He had resisted. There were scrape marks on adjacent stones, not signs of desperation, but of controlled, tactical movements. That canine was trained for survival, and he was leaving indicators like a trail of crumbs. As he traced the path, a recollection stirred in Mark's thoughts, an image from 5 years prior. He had been positioned at the verge of a combat zone in Kandahar, bleeding from his shoulder, while a canine trained to detect explosives steadfastly remained by his side. That dog's designation had been Shadow. Shadow did not return. Mark did. However, upon his arrival back in the United States, it was Shadow's handler who acquainted him with a traumatized German shepherd named Rex, a dog who had witnessed his own handler perish in a foreign land. Mark recalled his initial encounter with Rex, no vocalization, merely direct eye contact, a quiet acknowledgement as if two spirits had finally converged amidst devastation. The department had deemed Rex too volatile for further service. Mark held a different view. He took him in without inquiry. They mutually rescued each other without a single word exchanged. Returning to the present, a glint of silver captured his attention, barbed wire fencing at the margin of a disused cattle trail. Impaled on one of the barbs was a clump of fur, and beside it, a ripped beverage container with a message scrawled in bold black lettering, "Attempt to locate him, officer." His jaw clenched. He crushed the message and proceeded further into the desolate area. Now, several miles distant, situated between a dilapidated barn and corroded silos, stood an encampment Mark recognized all too well. Years before, it had been the location of a firearms seizure. Now, it appeared more sinister, reinforced, under guard, the sort of location individuals frequented when they wished to remain undiscovered. Within that encampment, secured by a chain and bleeding in the corner of a poorly illuminated garage, was Rex. His hind leg was inflamed, his coat matted with blood and grime. Yet his eyes retained their intensity, observing, assessing, awaiting. A younger motorcyclist lingered nearby, perhaps 19 years of age, appearing anxious. The others around him were laughing, but he could not participate. Rex whimpered, not for assistance, but as if to remind the youth, "I am alive. I perceive you." Upstairs, at the core of the compound, Jace Rowan forcefully placed a bottle on a surface and growled, "That animal is going to incur a heavy price for them." Back in town, Mark drove to the sole location he could imagine might offer assistance, a weathered trailer situated by the waterway. It was the residence of Hank Donovan, a retired motorcyclist with more regrets than intact teeth. Years prior, Mark had rescued Hank's daughter from a narcotics den. This evening, he was redeeming that favor. Hank examined the note and the blood on Mark's hands. His complexion turned ashen. "If they have your dog," he stated deliberately, "you had best hope he is still alive." And somewhere, concealed in the darkness, Rex waited. Not to be rescued, but to fight. The tempest was drawing nearer, pulling the darkness of night behind it like a shroud. Thunder resonated in the distance as Mark stood outside Hank's dwelling, the old man's pronouncements echoing in his thoughts. You had best hope he is still alive. Yet Mark was not an individual given to supplication. He was a man of his word, one who honored his commitments regardless of the sacrifice. Inside the patrol car, he accessed the storage compartment and retrieved a diminutive, worn photograph. It depicted him and Rex, both appearing younger, both showing signs of wear after a lengthy mission. Rex's tongue lolled out, his tail wagging as if he hadn't just apprehended two individuals in a narcotics laboratory raid. Mark traced his thumb over the image, his jaw set. "You rescued me on one occasion," he murmured. "Now it is my opportunity." He did not return to the station, nor did he report the incident. Instead, he drove to the periphery of Ridgefield, to a location no longer frequented by anyone, an antiquated training cabin situated amidst weather-beaten trees and the verge of a long-neglected gorge. This was the place where he and Rex had trained in their initial days, concealed from view, free from scrutiny. Just a man and a dog reconstructing themselves, one instruction at a time. Mark entered the cabin, the wooden floor emitting groans beneath his footwear. Dust motes danced in the moonlight that streamed through the fractured window panes. He proceeded to the distant corner and knelt. Concealed beneath a shallow layer of soil was an aged plaything, Rex's first. It was tattered from chewing but had never been discarded. He held it firmly and shut his eyes. "I am en route for you, companion. Just persevere." Across town, precipitation had commenced. In a secured garage, illuminated by a solitary, suspended light source, Rex stirred. He had been intermittently conscious, pain distorting his sense of time. But now he was awake, vigilant. The chain encircling his neck was causing abrasion. His hind limb throbbed intensely. Yet he was not defeated, not yet. He tested the air. Something was altering. The aroma of petroleum, fuel, precipitation, and something additional, something recognizable. He emitted a soft growl, not of apprehension, but of defiance. One of the motorcyclists entered, depositing food scraps into a container. Rex remained unmoved. The young motorcyclist, Eli, observed from the entrance, his jaw tight, his hands quivering. He detested this situation. It was not what he had anticipated. Yet, fear resonated more strongly than culpability. Still, when Rex looked at him, a single glance, Eli sensed it. This dog was not merely an animal. He was something more, something noble, something revered. Back on the road, Mark positioned his vehicle a mile from the compound. Rain now fell in torrents. He donned his black tactical jacket, concealed a knife in his boot, secured his sidearm, and placed a pair of wire-cutting pliers in his pocket. He did not comport himself like a law enforcement officer this evening. He moved like an apparition with a grievance to redress. He approached on foot, as silent as the wind, navigating through gullies and undergrowth until the silhouette of the compound became visible. Corroded fences, walls covered in graffiti, motorcyclists congregated under shelters, smoking, laughing, oblivious. Mark located an unobserved area, severed the fence, and slipped through like mist. Inside, the location was chaotic. Old shipping containers piled like building blocks, motorcycles everywhere. Yet Mark did not flinch. He moved into the shadows, bypassing guards with meticulous accuracy. He punctured a tire with his knife, disconnected a fuel line, and left a trail of subtle destruction. Every movement was driven by recollection. The day Rex interposed himself between Mark and an armed assailant. The night Rex rested on Mark's chest following a panic episode, the mornings they sat in quiet contemplation before a shift, not as colleagues, but as kin. Then he saw him through a fissure in the rusted metal barrier, Rex, chained, saturated, barely conscious. Mark's heart sank. He pressed his hand against the frigid metal. "Persevere, boy," he murmured. "Just one additional minute." Rain hammered down like a battle drum. The compound was erratically illuminated as lightning split the sky, projecting distorted shadows across the rusted metal and fractured pavement. Somewhere within, soaked and wounded, Rex lay chained, still breathing, still watching. But outside, slipping between the shadows like a phantom, was Mark Trener. And this wasn't a mission anymore. It was a vow in motion. Mark moved low, calculated, heart pounding in sync with the thunder. Every step was memory-fueled. Every breath felt like inhaling flame. He bypassed the front entrance, knowing it would be a death trap. Years of training taught him better. The real entrance wasn't one the bikers guarded, it was one they forgot. Behind the garages, buried under crates and collapsed scaffolding, a drainage tunnel from the old construction days lay untouched. He crawled through it, mud soaking into his knees, the air so thick with rot and oil he almost gagged. But he kept moving, eyes burning through the dark. This tunnel had been mapped out years ago during a bust. Back then he had marked it in his memory, not for an escape, but in case he ever needed to come back. When he emerged inside the perimeter, the storm was louder. The noise, the confusion, it was cover. Above, bikers laughed over beer and cigarettes, completely unaware that the ghost they feared had already slipped inside. Mark flattened himself against a container wall, tracking movement with precision. He didn't just want to get Rex out, he wanted to take the place apart from the inside, quietly, meticulously, one failure at a time. He moved quickly, let air out of 2 bikes, cut the wires on a backup generator, dropped a flare behind the fuel barrels, just enough to cause panic later. Not explosion, just chaos, the kind that scattered thugs and exposed weak links. As he made his way to the garage, he paused at a broken window. And through that narrow slit of light, he saw him, Rex lying limp, soaked, covered in grime and blood, but awake. Their eyes met for the briefest second and Mark's soul cracked open. His hand pressed against the wall, steadying himself. Not because he was scared, but because that moment, that glance was more than recognition. It was trust. Absolute, burning trust. Then the door creaked open behind him. Mark turned, knife raised, heart in his throat. It wasn't a guard. It was Eli, the younger biker from before. They stared at each other, rain dripping between them. Eli's lip trembled, his hand hovered near his belt but didn't move. "You here for the dog?" Eli asked, his voice barely above the rain. Mark said nothing, just stared. Eli stepped back. "You've got maybe 5 minutes before the others finish their round. You better move." And just like that, he disappeared. Mark didn't wait. He sprinted across the flooded alley, heart slamming, shoulders tight, eyes on that rusted door where Rex was chained like an old bike no one cared to fix. He busted the lock with the crowbar he'd stashed in his belt. Inside, the smell hit him, blood, rust, wet fur. Rex didn't move at first. His eyes fluttered. Mark dropped to his knees and slid under the chain, holding Rex's face in his palms. "I got you," he whispered. "I'm here." Rex whimpered weakly, nuzzling his face against Mark's shoulder. Then, footsteps heavy, fast. The door slammed shut behind him. Jace Rowan stood in the doorway, smirking beneath his drenched leather vest, knife in hand. "You really thought we wouldn't prepare for you?" he sneered. Mark didn't flinch. He stood slowly, keeping one hand behind him, one hand clenched into a fist. "You have no idea," Mark said, eyes burning, "what I'm prepared for." And in that moment, the storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to erupt inside. The atmosphere within that garage possessed a palpable intensity. Water dripped rhythmically from the porous roof, each droplet sounding like a metronome counting down. Mark positioned himself between Jace and Rex, his gaze fixed on the individual who had masterminded the entire ordeal, who had abducted his companion, subjected him to brutality, and confined him like refuse. Yet Mark exhibited no tremor, no apprehension. He remained composed. And for individuals like Jace, composure often heralded the final silence before an impending catastrophe. Jace initiated the attack, a glint of metal arcing through the air. Mark sidestepped to his left, allowing the assailant's impetus to propel him into a stack of containers. The impact resonated like an alarm throughout the compound. Mark did not hesitate. He seized a spanner from the workbench and delivered a forceful blow to Jace's arm. The knife dropped to the ground with a clatter. Externally, sounds of activity arose, footsteps. The remainder of the group was now on guard. But within this space, nothing else held significance, only two men, one consumed by self-importance, the other driven by a more profound motivation, an inferno fueled by years of bereavement, allegiance, and an unwavering commitment. Jace bellowed, launching another assault. They clashed, exchanging blows, their footwear struggling for purchase on the slick surface. Mark fought with the ferocity of his past desert experiences, accurate, merciless, unyielding. Yet he was not impervious. An unexpected strike to his side sent him reeling against the wall. Jace reached for the fallen knife. Then a sound brought both men to a halt, a growl, low, fierce, familiar. Rex. He had managed to rise, drawing on his remaining reserves of strength, one paw forward, then another. His body quaked, but his gaze was locked on Jace, radiating pure intensity. The chain rattled as he strained against it, canines bared, fur erect. Jace chuckled, wiping blood from his mouth. What's he going to do? Bleed on me? Mark, though winded but still vigilant, capitalized on the diversion. He executed a leg sweep, sending Jace sprawling. With a grunt, he subdued him, delivering a barrage of furious blows. "You don't touch what's mine," Mark snarled through clenched teeth, striking repeatedly until Jace ceased to resist. The door burst open, more voices. Mark rushed to Rex. His hands quivered as he detached the chain from the collar, gently placing an arm beneath the dog's midsection. Rex whimpered but offered no resistance. "I've got you," Mark murmured. "We're going home." Rex slumped into his embrace, his head resting on Mark's shoulder. The warmth of him, even amidst the storm-drenched nightmare, felt like hope. Then a distant rumble, not thunder, but engines. More bikers were approaching. Mark glanced towards the open doorway. He was injured. Rex was barely conscious. No reinforcements, no time. He darted out into the rain, Rex in his arms, sprinting towards the rear exit. He ducked behind crates, evaded beams of light. But each step was slower, each breath more difficult. Behind him, chaos erupted, bikers shouting, doors slamming, Jace groaning as he regained consciousness. Mark reached the outer fence and dropped to one knee. His side throbbed where Jace's punch had landed. Blood dripped into the mud. He looked down at Rex, eyes barely open, but still there, still alive. "I promised you," Mark whispered. "I'd never leave you behind." Then sirens, faint at first, then closer. But something else, too, the rev of hostile engines. The others were here, trapped between the law and the outlaws, bleeding, carrying the only thing in this world that ever brought him peace. Mark whispered to Rex one last time, his voice cracking, "Just hold on, buddy. Not yet. We're not safe." And with that he stood, one last surge of strength, and ran into the storm. Because sometimes survival isn't just about strength, it's about what you refuse to lose. The desert rarely offers clemency, and on this night, it exacted a toll for every footfall. Mark's footwear sank into the sodden pathways as he pressed onward, cradling Rex securely against his torso. The weight of his companion was not a hardship, it served as a poignant reminder of every shared journey. Every surmounted obstacle, every instance Rex had acted as his protector. The rain lashed down from above, the wind buffeting his face, yet Mark did not falter. He could not. Behind him, the drone of motors intensified, growing more irate. The motorcyclists were not relinquishing their pursuit, not after his actions against Jace, not after exposing their stronghold. The sole prospect lay in reaching elevated terrain to signal for aerial medical evacuation or perish in the attempt. And judging by the ache in his ribs and the protest from his limbs with each stride, perishing seemed a more proximate possibility than he cared to acknowledge. Rex emitted a single, faint whimper, barely perceptible, yet to Mark, it resonated louder than the thunder. He glanced downward, and in that fleeting moment, a memory resurfaced. Years prior, their inaugural field operation together. Mark had suffered a fall within a collapsed passage, and it was Rex who had ventured into the debris, barked for assistance, and extricated him. He owed this canine more than his existence. He owed him a future. Yet, futures do not await. They must be secured. Even amidst the tempest, Mark sought cover behind a cluster of large rocks and retrieved his radio from his belt. His voice trembled. "Officer down. K9 critical. Coordinates transmitted. Request immediate evacuation. Hostiles in pursuit. Static." Then, a faint acknowledgement. "ETA 8 minutes. Maintain position. 8 minutes, an eternity in a pursuit." He enveloped Rex more snugly in his jacket and murmured, "Just remain with me, companion. Just 8 more." The pathway constricted into a series of sharp turns, bordered by thorny vegetation and unstable stones. Mark's breathing grew more labored, his vision becoming indistinct, yet he forged ahead, for to halt signified failure, and failure was not a consideration. Then, a sound from behind, an engine revving, a shout. They were gaining ground, and abruptly, a figure obstructed his route. Eli, the young motorcyclist. He had discarded his gang's insignia, his hands raised. Rain streamed down his face, his eyes wide with an expression that was not fear, but resolve. "They'll kill you," Eli stated. "You won't make it to the ridge." Mark offered no reply. "I'm not with them," Eli said quickly, almost imploringly. "Not after what they did to that dog." Silence lingered for a fraction of a second. Then Eli tossed him a set of keys. "Take my bike. Parked in the ravine near the old water tank. I'll slow them down." Mark stared at him, uncertain, but Rex stirred. One paw tapped his chest as if saying, "Do it." Without a word, Mark took the keys. No promises, no thanks, just understanding. He found the bike exactly where Eli said, half covered in reeds, engine still warm. Mark mounted it, adjusted Rex gently onto his lap, using his jacket to steady him, and kicked the engine to life. The roar sliced through the night, a rebel yell in the storm. As they sped toward the ridge, Mark glanced back once. Eli stood in the path, arms outstretched as the headlights of the gang came barreling toward him. And then the trail turned and Mark lost sight. Up ahead, red and blue lights began flashing through the fog. Police units, back up. But so did the glint of chrome in pursuit. It wasn't over. Mark leaned in, holding Rex tight, whispering against the wind, "We're almost there. Just one more ride." And as the rain fell harder, 2 shadows streaked through the storm, one chasing hope, the other refusing to die before it was delivered. Mud splattered as Mark sped down the ridge pathway, the motorcycle bucking beneath the combined mass of man, dog, and urgency. Wind tore at his saturated garments, Yet his arms remained steady, not with Rex in his lap, held against him like a sacred object. The sirens ahead were more distinct now, police illuminations flickering like remote signals. Deliverance seemed just out of reach, yet peril pursued them closely. Behind them, 5 motorcycles roared through the rain, their engines sounding like a pack of wolves detecting the scent of blood. The gang showed no interest in escape or parley. This was not a pursuit, it was a hunt. Mark clenched his jaw and increased the throttle. They were approaching the cliffside checkpoint, a restricted ridge leading to the promontory where the medical evacuation team was scheduled to arrive. However, the road was treacherous, deteriorating in sections, and a single misstep would send them plummeting into the gorge below. His shoulder throbbed from Jace's previous blow, every inhalation tasted of metal. But Rex had not stirred for several minutes. "Remain with me, companion," Mark mumbled, wiping rain from the dog's face. "We are nearly there." Then, abruptly, the road ceased. The ancient bridge, destroyed 2 years prior in a monsoon and never mended. Mark brought the motorcycle to a skidding halt, tires screeching on the wet stone. The chasm below gaped like an open grave. They were ensnared. He dismounted, clutching Rex, his gaze darting. To the left, dense woodland, to the right, a precipitous incline. No time to flee, the gang was rapidly approaching. And then, fortune intervened once more. Police vehicles appeared over the ridge behind them, their red and blue emergency lights casting surreal hues across the soaked terrain. For a fleeting moment, everything stilled, Mark at the center, motorcyclists behind, law enforcement ahead, rain pouring as if the heavens wept. Then pandemonium. Gunshots erupted. Tires spun. One motorcyclist veered off the path, colliding with a tree. Another brandished a chain, swinging it towards a patrol car. But the officers were prepared, more than prepared. Eli's caution had served its purpose. Mark sought cover behind a large rock, Rex in his arms, shielding him from the conflict. Gunfire crackled above them. He ducked lower, murmuring, "Just breathe. Just hold on." A projectile ricocheted off a nearby stone, grazing Mark's back. He winced but remained motionless, his sole concern the dog in his lap. Then, a familiar voice, Hank Donovan, speaking through a megaphone. "Lower your armaments. You are encircled." The gang dispersed, those who did not succumb fled. 2 were apprehended immediately. Jace was nowhere to be found, perhaps still unconscious, perhaps gone. Mark no longer cared. Medical personnel rushed over as the exchange of fire subsided. One knelt beside him, checking Rex's pulse. Another observed Mark's drenched uniform and bruised countenance. "He requires surgery," the medic stated urgently. "Internal hemorrhaging. Cannot delay." Mark nodded, his voice hoarse. "Take him. Take everything." As Rex was placed onto the gurney, Mark reached out, laying one hand on his chest. "You performed admirably, boy," he whispered. "You accomplished more than anyone will ever comprehend." Rex's eyes flickered open, just slightly. A slow blink, then his tail, a single, feeble wag. Mark turned to the officer beside him. "He receives the finest care. The cost is irrelevant." "Understood," the officer replied, his eyes wide with admiration. As the helicopter rotors whirred to life above the promontory, lifting Rex into the sky, Mark watched with a combination of relief and collapse. His knees buckled, but it mattered little, for that was not merely a dog being transported to safety, that was family. And regardless of what transpired next, Mark knew his struggle had never been about vengeance, it had been about atonement. The hospital waiting area was hushed, but for the faint drone of fluorescent fixtures and the remote sound of surgical instruments from behind closed double doors. Mark sat slumped on a plastic seat, dried blood caked on his temple, his knuckles still abraded. His uniform felt oppressive with dampness and weariness. Yet none of this held significance until someone emerged from those doors with an answer. His fingers nervously played with the edge of a dressing on his wrist. Opposite him, a nurse held a chart, offering him gentle looks that conveyed everything without utterance. No one posed inquiries, none were necessary. The expression in Mark's eyes, partly devastated, partly refusing to yield, sufficed. Time passed in disconnected intervals. The tempest outside had subsided, leaving only a mist behind the panes. Yet Mark remained motionless. His physique was at rest, but his thoughts traversed recollections, anxieties. Every instance Rex had shielded him, awaited him, trusted him. And now he was uncertain if he would ever reclaim that connection. Then the doors swung ajar. Dr. Arab Bishop, a surgeon with silver streaks in her hair and a composed tone, approached him. Her expression was inscrutable. She paused, removing her gloves. "He's alive," she stated softly. Mark's breath caught. He did not blink. "But he's not out of the woods," she went on. Ruptured spleen, fractured hip, heavy blood loss. The surgery went well, but the next few days will decide the rest. Mark nodded once. That was sufficient. Merely alive, that was all he needed to hear. They permitted him entry to the ICU shortly after dawn. The chamber smelled of disinfectant and quiet optimism. Rex lay on a low gurney, bandaged and breathing with the aid of a ventilator. Monitors beeped gently. But as Mark drew nearer, one brown eye opened slightly and his tail gave the faintest, most languid wag. Mark chuckled, a low, rough sound. Still got fight in you, huh? He sat beside him, leaned in, and placed his forehead gently against Rex's. You saved me more times than I can count, he whispered. This world doesn't deserve you, but I do. So rest. I'll keep watch now.